Welcome to Pharma Source, recorded at CDMO Live 2025. This episode is brought to you by Qualifies, the platform that helps life science teams streamline audits and predict site risks with AI-driven insights.
A session I know that everyone's looking forward to because everyone wants to try to figure out how to answer some of these problems. And I know that Gil's going to say he can't promise any answers with this, but he can certainly give a very well-informed perspective of what's happening in the US with the new Donald Trump administration and the impact on the US drug manufacturing landscape. Gil Roth, please join us.
Hi. I'm Gil Roth. I'm the president of the Pharma and Biopharma Outsourcing Association. We're a trade group that represents CMOs and CDMOs. First, I want to thank Luke, Chris, and the whole team here for putting on a wonderful event and for inviting me to speak. It's really a great opportunity for this inaugural in-person event. Now, PBOA is a trade association I founded in 2014. Basically, I spent about 15 years as the editor of Contract Pharma magazine. Some of you heard this yesterday on the panel, but I'm going to repeat this stuff anyway. I founded the association with the idea of giving CDMOs a voice and a seat at the table, the opportunity to get in front of FDA and ultimately get in front of Congress and then other regulators and legislators. So our membership is at present 39 CDMOs as well as 21 affiliate members. Those are companies that provide goods and services to the CMO space. And you can see the bold-faced ones are our founding members or sustaining members, guys who are on our board of trustees, since we're a nonprofit. I'm going to throw a lot of information at you in a very short period of time. The upshot is Adam at LEK did such a great job this morning talking about market trends, investments, clinical trial starts, et cetera. I don't need to get into any of that market forces and M&A stuff. We're going to talk about policy, things that this government is engaged in, that the US government, that will impact the CDMO sector and its clients moving forward. The first of those, tariffs. Everybody wants to know what's going on with tariffs. Nobody knows. Nobody knows anything. I was told I need to come up with a key takeaway for this presentation. I'm going to give it to you now. Nobody knows. Nobody knows anything. You need to be focused on flexibility and optionality. You need to be prepared for very strange things being announced suddenly and potentially being withdrawn shortly after. You need to start looking at sort of the tea leaves and the psychology behind some decisions that get made. As far as tariffs go, I discovered a mutant superpower in recent months, which is anytime I write an email to PBOA's member companies explaining the current state of tariffs that have been instituted by the US government and hit send, that triggers the White House into changing its tariff policy. This has happened 4 times now, and each time I thought, I'm not going to fall for this again. And each time, now I just put it in as a bullet item in a larger email. I refuse to do full-scale tariff updates because everything becomes obsolete pretty quickly. That's the way this administration is working, and it's part of what we have to accommodate from a CMO perspective, from a larger healthcare perspective. So the initial round of tariffs, as I'm sure, I don't know how aware you guys are of everything that has gone on. Within the US, I stay on top of a lot of these things. The initial round of tariffs were instituted on Canada, Mexico, and China. Then rest of world, which is where this whole thing came from, the reciprocal tariffs concept that then got delayed by 90 days. Instead, there's a 10% tariff on all non-Canada, Mexico, China countries. At present, we're seeing I believe, 25% tariff on steel and aluminum products. So pharmaceuticals were exempted from that initial wave of tariffs that were done on April 2nd. The reported story behind that is that a number of larger pharma, as well as specifically the generic industry, really got the ear of the White House and the Department of Commerce to explain what the potential impact of tariffs on the generic healthcare system, in particular, the accessibility of generic drugs, how that could be affected very adversely by pharmaceutical tariffs. Now, the president did announce they're going to have some sort of sectoral pharma tariffs. No one knows what that's going to entail. There's always an announcement that it's coming in a week, it's coming in a few weeks, sometime in the near future. A few days ago, it was in the next 2 weeks, there'll be an announcement. No one knows. No one knows what shape they're going to take. Anything you read that says there are experts who say it will be 25% across the board, there are no experts. We're in uncharted territory for a lot of these things, and so it's very difficult to say with any sense of clarity or certainty that these things are going to happen. Now, right now, we just finished, about 6 hours ago was the deadline for something called the Section 232 probe into the national security implications of pharmaceutical products and pharma ingredients. This is a procedural step where the Department of Commerce collects information to figure out what national security risks, in this case, the pharma supply chain entails for the U.S., and then what solutions are available, or at least suggested by the people who choose to respond to this request for information. The word tariffs only comes up once in that document. It's a Federal Register document. I can provide you a link to that afterwards. They ask a lot of questions about national security, about U.S. ability to manufacture both pharma ingredients and pharma products. PBOA submitted its response shortly before the vote party yesterday. I was collating answers and getting edits done and finalizing the layout PDF, and everything was out the door, and then it was time to go to the reception. Pharma just published theirs a day before. It is 42 pages long. They are vehemently against the use of tariffs, and from a PBOA perspective, our comments will be public as part of the submission process. We also came out with a pro-regulatory streamlining and financial and tax code related incentives that might induce or incentivize greater domestic manufacturing in the U.S., while also respecting the global nature of the supply chain, the necessity of working with trading partners. We are not in favor of a tariff policy, given how dangerous that can be when it comes to affecting imports, creating negative incentives for manufacturing, and the potential for retaliatory tariffs from other parties. Other regions. Major pharma, as you can see in this slide, their response to a lot of the tariff threats have been to announce significant investments in the U.S. And you can see from what's there, Lilly, Novartis, J&J, Merck, AbbVie made an announcement that's not included there. Gilead just yesterday said they'll be adding $11 billion to their investment. Bristol Myers alluded to a $40 billion investment over the next several years. Within our space, Thermo Fisher, one of our biggest member, mentioned a $2 billion investment, not just for their contract services space, but their overall Thermo Fisher business. So we're seeing a significant amount of domestic investment being announced, being made, and I think some of that is in the hopes that the administration will see that and step down from a tariff-based policy. But again, no one knows. There are potential implications to everything you see up there from a CDMO perspective, which I alluded to during the panel yesterday. There are issues around the cost for some of these things, the availability of equipment that they'll be purchasing that CDMOs might also want to purchase. But to me, more importantly, they need workforce for all of these sites that are going up, and those are some of the same people who would be working at CDMOs. So as much as I love the CDMO sector and have devoted my career to it since 1999, those guys have deeper pockets, and it could become a workforce drain on the CDMO side as some of these facilities go online, depending on location, depending on what they're working on, if it's manufacturing versus R&D, et cetera. But there could be a significant impact on the CDMO workforce in America. So that's part of the tariff window. That's a major aspect of what we're concerned with from a PBOA perspective. The other major thing that's going on, these are just two big ones. The other big thing is the FDA and what is going on at the agency, what our involvement is, what industry does. I founded PBOA in 2014 because of GDUFA, the Generic Drug User Fee Amendments. They had a facility fee structure, which we'll get back to in a minute, that was unfairly penalizing CDMO facilities, both API and dosage form. They were getting hit with very large fees to help fund the GDUFA program, which was intended to tended to fund faster reviews of generic drug applications and inspections of facilities. All of the major user fees, all of the FDA's user fees, which are negotiated between industry and FDA and then transmitted to Congress, those get negotiated every 5 years. This is a 5-year cycle right now. So negotiations are supposed to begin this fall for the next round of GDUFA, PDUFA, the prescription drug version, BSUFA, biosimilars, and MDUFA for medical devices. So we are in an administration where the Secretary of HHS, which oversees the FDA, he, before the nomination to run HHS in his previous statements, had come out against the nature of user fees. He contends that those comprise industry capture of regulators, essentially saying that FDA is bought because industry pays in these user fees. Trust me, that's not the case. However, HHS is going to guide what FDA's priorities are going into that negotiation this fall, and we have to bear in mind the possibility that there's going to be drastic changes in the way user fees are structured, in the way they're perceived, potentially in whether they happen or not. I have no clarity on this stuff, and as I mentioned yesterday in the panel, I game things out to really apocalyptic levels. I go for how bad can things really get, and then how do we step back from that or defuse it before it gets there. My bad is that the user fee structure completely collapses, and what that means is that the user fees are largely based around creating review timelines for drugs. So every NDA and BLA will be reviewed within 10 months of acceptance of the application. Not necessarily a yes, but it'll get either a yes or a complete response letter, or a refuse to file. ANDAs are the same thing. It's 10 months. PDUFA has a 6-month priority. GDUFA has an 8-month priority, but it's really about review timelines. If the user fee model breaks down for whatever reason, and those review timelines are no longer valid, from a CDMO perspective, you don't know when your client's products are actually going to get approved. You don't know what the timeline is for those things. On a macro level, investors lose any clarity on when milestones are going to be reached, and that can be really damaging from the way R&D pipelines are currently comprised, given the investment focus side of the industry, particularly in the startup world. So there's a lot of potential problems that could come from what these negotiations turn into this fall. Now, we're part of the GDUFA ones again. We negotiated GDUFA 2 and 3, and we'll be part of 4. We don't have much insight into PDUFA, which is the negotiating parties are Pharma and Bio, who are working with FDA. But the other big issue about all this stuff is that the nature of these user fee negotiations are industry comes in with a whole bunch of asks. And this will be driven by the generic industry, but it'll also be us and a bulk pharmaceutical task force. We come in with a bunch of asks. FDA says we can do this, can't do that, can do this. This is how many full-time equivalents we're going to need to do that. And a full-time equivalent equals X amount of dollars. And the secret is that's where the user fee pot comes from. Like when you hear that it's going to be X hundreds of millions of dollars a year, it's number of FTEs times cost per FTE, plus some additional costs like IT spending and some other things. All of that means the user fees are based on industry's faith and trust that the FDA will be able to hire and retain personnel. We are going through a period where the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, as well as HHS itself, have engaged in significant layoffs within HHS, and particularly at FDA, which apparently, the numbers aren't clear yet, has lost about 19 to 20% of its total staff. Could be a larger number because we're getting more reports of people who took early retirement when it was first offered in February, in addition to all the layoffs that took place on April Fool's Day. They can fire staff who were paid for by user fees. Those don't have an impact on the federal budget, but they can still be fired by the same process. The problem is, if the amount of firings ends up degrading the ability of FDA to live up to its user fee commitments, which they, again, are negotiated with industry and FDA and are codified by Congress, This could create problems for industry's willingness to step up to the next round of user fees. And what that could mean is Gil games things out to the apocalyptic levels. Things get really bad in terms of whether FDA can be relied on as a regulatory partner. We're seeing some pullback from those layoffs. There have been rehires that have taken place. The big wave of firings tried to avoid firing any drug reviewers or inspectors, but they did fire a lot of from what I gather, nothing is written in stone. They fired a lot of project managers, and those are the guys who organize all the reviewers for any drug application. And they help sort of arbitrate debates between different disciplines that are reviewing a drug application. And if that person is taken out of the loop, all you have are the reviewers, and then no one quite knows what happens to drug applications down the line. None of this stuff is going to show up immediately in terms of damage at the agency, but these are things that over time can become a change in terms of how we're used to things going. PDUFA has been around since 1992. It's been effective after the first 4 or 5 years once they built up the program. GDUFA is, again, going into its 4th incarnation if we reauthorize it for the next period. These are things that industry relies on, and we rely on it for inspections, PAIs, pre-approval inspections, as well as general surveillance. They kept the inspectors but fired all the travel staff. They're now realizing they need to rehire some of the travel staff because FDA cannot just, inspectors can't just book their own travel. They cannot work with the State Department to get visas. They have to have staff in place for that, and they're discovering the need for this. Now, in the middle of all that, on my drive to the airport Monday, my phone pings and I see President signs executive order incentivizing domestic pharma manufacturing. So I'm with my contacts in and driving in traffic, trying to look at my phone. I gave up, got to the airport. The general lines for what this is going to entail. Executive orders are not law. They do not supersede law. They can affect how agencies run outside of their legal and statutory constraints. This will push to incentivize domestic manufacturing by streamlining regulatory, streamlining the Environmental Protection Agency, finding things that are holding back domestic manufacturing investment, and increasing foreign facility inspections, increasing unannounced foreign facility inspections, which the FDA talked about a day or two ago, and raising fees paid by foreign facilities. This jumped out at me because there is only one user fee. There's a second one, but it's small. There's only one user fee that has facility fees in it, and that's GDUFA. That's the one that we negotiate. The prescription drug one does not have a facility fee component. GDUFA does. At present, the way GDUFA works, there is something called a foreign differential where a non-U.S. facility pays $15,000 more than a U.S. facility, whether it's dosage form or API, if you have registered generics in your site. What this executive order seems to imply is that that number will not be $15,000 when we start negotiating GDUFA 4 in a couple of months. I don't know anything, as again, nobody knows anything, as to what that number could ultimately be. We don't know what the generic industry would push back on because so many of that industry's facilities are ex-US. They could say, we're not accepting this very large facility fee. It needs to be, the same foreign differential we had in the previous GDUFA. We don't know, but it's a marker that's been put on the table by this administration and something we need to bear in mind as we move forward with the potential aspects of the next user fee negotiation. I'm sorry to go on really inside baseball about this stuff, but trust me, it is absolutely critical to the nature of how CMOs work with their customers and how customers' drug pipelines work. Because all these people are gone. Some of these people left early. The head of CDER retired a month or two, or a few weeks before the inauguration. The head of CBER resigned very recently and has been giving interviews about that. The head of medical device left last year. A lot of other non-political appointees took retirement or were fired in recent months. which means FDA needs to replace high-level staff at the same time that it's got its user fee commitments to bring aboard FTEs for drug reviews, inspections, and all the management around that stuff. So there's a lot of institutional knowledge that's been lost in the process of this. It's been reported, so I'm not dishing anything proprietary here, but all the people who were supposed to be at the table to negotiate the user fees with us, apparently from GDUFA, PDUFA, and BSUFA, there's only one person left. At my last quarterly GDUFA implementation meeting, which was part of our obligation as partners with the FDA, they told us everybody who was going to be at the table for GDUFA 4, that was in January, and pretty much all of them are no longer at FDA. Some took early retirement. Some of them are very knowledgeable, again, about how that org chart works and how everything under it works. And they are not there. So it's going to be interesting to see how FDA figures out its resource needs, what industry asks, how well they respond to that, whether they come in with certain priorities or new ideas for review timelines or commitments or replacing reviewers with AI or something. I'm not talking out of my butt on that one. That came up in the last day or two, a line about the FDA potentially using OpenAI products for doing drug reviews. The other big thing, again, there's a lot of big things here, and it goes back to the tariff and supply chain side of things. That's China. Last year was the year of Biosecure, where there was a congressional bill that was being floated to prohibit companies from working with certain companies that are based in China because of their affiliation with the People's Liberation Army. Wuxi AppTec and Wuxi Bio were two of those firms. The bill did not pass. There are various factors that went into that, but the bill as it was written would have given companies about 7 years to decouple from those 5 named companies and any companies that were added to the list based on its criteria, or they would not be able to receive government contracts under federal acquisition regulations. That is not Medicare and Medicaid, but that's a lot of other stuff, including the VA, the Veterans Administration, which is a big buyer of drugs, and if you were doing business with those companies, you would not have been allowed to sell to the VA. But that didn't happen, didn't go through. And I spent a year walking through this with my member companies and all of their clients who were in a panic and asking about companies' availability, who they could work with if they did have to withdraw from either Wuxi AppTec or Wuxi Bio, or potentially getting out of China completely. It was a lot of work. A lot of our members had a lot of RFPs to deal with and figuring out what flexibility they had, what timelines were like. And then it didn't happen. But the halo effect of it and the potential hangover seems to be that a lot of companies, especially venture-funded startups that may have been considering project starts in China, have been avoiding that. They've been looking for Western providers instead. Now that's going to be earlier stage CDMO work, discovery, early development, things along those lines. But it does create potential market opportunities for CDMOs given the ambiguity about what can happen between U.S.-China relations going forwards. It was a lot of work. This sector went through a great deal trying to figure out what resources it had, as well as trying to understand, the impact of China as a participant in the supply chain. This is a document that almost nobody has seen, but my lobbyist came across it and sent it to me. At the very end of 2023, FDA wrote to Congress to answer a bunch of their questions about working with China, as well as supply chain resilience. And one of the things FDA wrote was that their inspectors are nervous about going to China because of the Counter-Espionage Act, or law that was passed in July 2023. Anecdotally, I've heard stories of inspectors being pulled from their hotel rooms at 2 o'clock in the morning and taken to a police station. When the company they're there to inspect opens up, they are able to come get them out of the police station and explain, no, they're here legitimately, they're here for an inspection. Other regimes have told me the same stories, EMA and Japan. And it raises the question, if you start doing unannounced foreign inspections, particularly in China, and the companies you're there to inspect have no idea you're there to inspect them, they might not show up at the police station to bail the inspector out of jail. So I think there's still going, despite this current FDA push for greater unannounced inspections and greater foreign inspections, there are issues in other countries that could preclude some of that. This was an issue. I brought this up at a Chinese pharma event, and they were very unhappy with me. But I got 2.5 minutes left. I want to talk about a thing that happened last year, and part of the takeaway and part of the understanding of working with this administration versus the previous one. Last year during the Bio conference, there was an event offsite for the Biopharma Coalition, or Bio5 as it's known. The US, European Commission, India, Japan, and Korea met. It was a public-private event. We're not allowed to say who was in the room. I was there. And the focus, as I highlight there, was building resilient supply chains for APIs currently sourced primarily from the People's Republic of China. So you had these 5 countries talking about what they could do to start rebuilding API supply chains in particular, not to replace China, but to at least create redundant supply chains. And one example was a country that said they wanted to start bringing beta-lactams back and knew they could not do it cost effectively solely for their country. If the other 4 regions were willing to commit to buying from them, they could scale up, never reach China costs because labor costs and environmental and other things are still a barrier, but they would at least be able to sell more financially feasibly. It was a good idea. It came up with a couple of other potential ingredients, heparin and a few other things were discussed. And that's gone. This, the website I got this from is now a 404, not found on the White House site. This whole thing has disappeared. This current administration, it's much less about multilateral agreements and much more about bilateral. Just this morning, we're supposed to hear an announcement about a U.S. trade agreement with China, with the UK, that is the way this administration looks to work, do these one-to-one negotiations, hence the reciprocal tariff announcement April 2nd, as well as a number of other activities and enforcements that this administration has done. So something like this, great idea, would have involved these 5 countries and maybe other ones coming into the pool, working together to develop some of these, particularly for the various essential medicines lists that the US, European Commission, and WHO have. But that's all gone. We're not in that world now, and we have to look at other ways of doing business, other ways of securing supply chains, knowing that there is no fortress America. There's so many things that go into the pharma supply chain you cannot make in a single country, and getting the administration to understand that and not penalize firms for having supply chains that work around this. Takeaway is nobody knows anything. You need to develop flexibility and optionality. You need to work closely with your clients, understand their supply chains and yours very, very well. Keep on top of tariffs. I'm not going to say join PBOA so that you get a better insight into what's going on the Hill, but my members get a very good insight into what's going on Capitol Hill and how we're able to affect things. So thank you everyone for your time. I'll be outside. Just grab me and ask questions, although half of you have already done that in the last day. Thanks all.
All right, thank you so much, Gil, and thanks for all of Gil's support right from the beginning with what we're doing at PharmaSource and CDMO Live as well. It's been great to have the PBOA support.
For more external manufacturing insights, head to cdmolive.com and download our 50-page summary of the event. Make sure to book your ticket for CDMO Live 2026, taking place the 27th to 28th of May at the World Trade Center, Rotterdam. We look forward to seeing you there.